Hello, welcome everybody to this another wonderful conversation that I am going to be having in this video with Ada Pembroke, who I am so happy to have here because Ada is bringing a really beautiful and not necessarily common perspective of the regendering of Venus and the moon, specifically in Mesopotamian astrology. And I just love her title, with the whole title being Morning Star and Horned Moon, the regendering of Venus and the moon in Mesopotamian astrology. So poetic and like takes me places, you know, in myself just hearing that title. So I can't wait to hear more, Ada. And thank you so much for being here. But before we start, I want to read your bio so people can know a little more about you and the beautiful work that you do. Ada Pembroke is a writer and narrative astrologer. Her unique approach to astrology combines her background in fiction writing with evolutionary astrology and traditional Western astrological techniques to help her clients tell transformational stories about their lives. She was mentored by evolutionary astrologer Paul Richard, studied in Steven Forrest's apprenticeship program, and has an MFA in creative writing from Goddard College. She currently lives in Portland, Oregon. Beautiful. And I just have a really quick question about your bio. So narrative astrology, I've never heard that term, but I used to do, as a psychotherapist, I did a lot of narrative therapy. So I'm guessing it's similar-ish. I don't know if you want to.
So I don't have a background in therapy, and I'm not a licensed counselor, so I can't claim to have that experience, but I did study for a semester in the transformative language arts program at Goddard College, and so I'm familiar with narrative therapy, and if I ever become a counselor, that's definitely going to be the direction I go. But yeah, there definitely is a similarity between the two.
Beautiful. Yeah, and my sense of what narrative therapy is, and probably narrative astrology, and probably related to the work you do and the way you're about to talk about, but is just how transformative it can be for us to create cohesion in the way that we conceive of ourselves and our lives, and to tell it through narrative.
Yes.
And to kind of like to make, instead of having our lives be fractured, confusing, chaotic components, to make it a cohesive flow in some way.
Yes.
Yeah. Beautiful. So is that similar, I'm guessing, with
absolutely.
what you do?
Yes, absolutely. One of my big focuses is to try to help people to see themselves as being the protagonists in their story, being active in their lives and not just simply reacting to things. And so I think that story helps. We have a natural sense of, you know, what Joseph Campbell called the hero's journey. And I think that if we could start to see ourselves as being, you know, in the hero's role instead of in the supporting character's role, or even maybe just one of the townsfolk who's running away from the monster, I think that it helps us to have agency.
Yeah, oh, it does. So powerful. Yay. That was my own little sidetrack because it caught my attention. And
I love it.
So beautiful. And the way that, again, the way that you write is so beautiful that I'm just intrigued about you and your work in general. So I need to take that little diversion.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. So
hopefully I'll bring that here today.
Yeah, Morning Star and Horned Moon. Go for it.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you so much for having me here. It is such a blessing. All right. So I believe that you can tell a lot about a society from that society's relationship with its rivers. I say something like that in a symposium full of spiritual people like this, and it takes us in an ecological direction, doesn't it? Mm-hmm. We start thinking about pollution and damming and declining salmon populations, all of the ways that humans are acting on our rivers. But what about the ways that our rivers act on us? For most of human history, Humans have been absolutely dependent on our rivers for our survival. Our rivers gave us water to drink, fish to eat, tools for writing, fertile mud for our fields, and bricks for our houses. Rivers were the roads that connected us to each other, allowing us to form complex societies that shared knowledge and resources. Rivers were everything, but they were not all the same. Rivers have different personalities, a bit like people do. I live in Portland, Oregon, not far from the confluence of the Columbia and the Sandy rivers. The Columbia is a big, impressive river, famous for carrying the Lewis and Clark expedition. It is heavily dammed now, which makes it seem sleepy and slow, until you get to the mouth of the river where it rages into the Pacific Ocean like a driver on a country road who has been caught behind a slow truck for hours and is finally allowed to pass. The Sandy is one of the few rivers in the United States that was dammed and has had its dams removed. It is an energetic and excitable river. You know, just looking at it, that the Sandy is going to keep you on your toes. Before we talk about the moon and Venus, I would like us to consider two ancient civilizations whose views of reality were profoundly shaped by the different personalities of the rivers that sustained them. If I ask you to think of an ancient civilization on the banks of a river, odds are good that Egypt is going to be one of the first that you think of. Egypt is practically synonymous with the Nile. As rivers go, the Nile is orderly. It floods at the same time every year, so consistently, the Egyptians used it to determine the date of their new year. The amount of flooding varied from year to year, but it was predictable enough that government officials had a system for determining taxes based on the abundance of the Nile's gift that year. They measured the height of the river at the flood, and they knew that from that flooding height, before the crops had even been planted, just how abundant the crops would be that year. They did this because it allowed them to determine exactly how much they would be able to tax the farmers without them revolting. That system worked so well, it was literally carved in stone on the banks of the Nile. Ancient Mesopotamia also had an important relationship with rivers. The word Mesopotamia is from the Greek, and it means between two rivers. These rivers are the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers in what is now Iraq. The Tigris and the Euphrates were not consistent like the Nile. They were erratic. There were years when the spring floods came late or didn't come at all. And there were years when the floods were excessive and drowned the fields or even whole cities. One of the most famous stories we've inherited from Mesopotamia is the Epic of Gilgamesh. It's one of the oldest hero stories we have, but it also tells the story of a flood that drowned the whole world. The flood was so extreme, even the gods were frightened of it and retreated to the sky. Some scholars believe that the story of that flood was actually a memory of a historical river flood that destroyed a Mesopotamian city. If this is true, it really shows that the erratic nature of the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers had a profound impact on the Mesopotamian psyche, and possibly beyond if the story influenced the biblical flood story. In both Egypt and Mesopotamia, the kingdom's relationship with their rivers was literally a matter of life and death. The people in those civilizations depended on their rivers the way a young child is dependent on their parents. These early parent-child relationships are so important. I don't think I need to go in depth lecturing on that here. But your relationship with your parents also views your view of the divine. A child with strict authoritarian parents is going to really struggle to connect with the conception of the divine that is loving, patient, and kind. And just like our families, our natural environment shapes our relationship with the divine too. Their relationship with their rivers profoundly shaped the religions of Egypt and Mesopotamia. The Nile was predictable and reliable. When the Egyptians looked for a metaphor for the divine, they didn't just see the gods as enforcers of order. The gods were themselves orderly. The Egyptians worshipped the sun, which was the obvious choice for divine order. Great stone monuments were built in the ancient world in celebration of the sun's predictability. But the Tigris and the Euphrates were fickle and capricious, giving too much sometimes and not enough at other times. The gods of Mesopotamia were enforcers of order. During the stage of Mesopotamians' history, when Marduk was king of the gods, there was a festival every year when chaos would descend on the city. Marduk would go missing, and he would have to be rescued so that he could restore order to the world. This view of the world as chaotic and the gods as essentially doing their best with a difficult situation is important for understanding the Mesopotamian worldview. Instead of seeing the divine as orderly and steady like the sun, the Mesopotamians saw the divine in the changeable moon. Of the two, the Egyptian worldview is most like our society's worldview. The Egyptians found order in their environment naturally. Their river was orderly, so the kingdom was orderly too. Our society also likes order and control. Our society likes order so much we don't hesitate to impose order on our rivers if they don't conform naturally. Our culture rewards people who are regular and predictable and punishes people who are changeable. If you call someone inconsistent here, it's a grave insult. And we also like the sun. Like the Egyptians, we use sunrise as a metaphor for new beginnings, as long as those new beginnings aren't too inconsistent, of course. For the Mesopotamians, new beginnings happened at night under the light of the crescent moon. To them, the world was made in darkness, and light emerged from darkness. These differences between sun and moon, order and predictability, they aren't superficial differences. The Mesopotamian worldview profoundly challenges our society's assumptions, especially for the purposes of this talk, our assumptions about gender. My hope for this talk is that spending a while with the Mesopotamian worldview will help us to look at our worldviews more clearly and help us to uncouple some concepts that have artificially been attached to the idea of gender in our society. Western modern astrology, as I practice it, is a blend of influences from Egypt, India, and Mesopotamia. Astrologers working today have inherited quite a bit from Mesopotamian astrology, such as the planets, the signs, and the importance of the lunar cycle and eclipses. But the underlying philosophy behind Mesopotamian astrology was very different than most modern approaches. Mesopotamian astrology was polytheistic. They didn't just name the planets after the gods. They believed that the planets were avatars of the gods. For example, in the Mesopotamian worldview, when you look at Venus shining like a diamond on the eastern horizon in the early morning, you're looking into the face of the divine. And there's something to that, isn't there? Have you ever seen the actual planet Venus in the sky? If you haven't, I would encourage you to try. She's in her morning star phase as I'm recording this, so you'll have to get up early in the morning or stay up really late to see her, but I believe that it's worth it. Venus really is a beautiful star, and there is magic there. Since the planets were faces of the gods, the positions of the planets in the sky were meaningful. It's kind of like the flag signals at the airport that help airplanes land. To the Mesopotamians, astrology was a way for the gods to communicate with humanity. The job of an astrologer was to interpret the gods' messages for the king. Sometimes the gods would give warnings about future events, but the Mesopotamians didn't see fate as being a fixed thing. If they didn't like the future they heard about from the gods, they believed that they had the power to change it through either practical action or magic. We have a story of a Mesopotamian astrologer predicting that a dam would break. He asked the king to allow him to destroy a dam in the countryside that nobody cared about so that the prophecy would be fulfilled, but a dam that they did care about wouldn't break. Allow me to do this, he said. I promise that no one will hear about it. This empowerment before the gods and fate is important. No discussion of the astrology of Mesopotamia is complete without the moon. The sun was the planet of the king in Mesopotamia, just like it was in Egypt, but the sun was barely mentioned by Mesopotamian astrologers. The affairs of the kingdom revolved around the moon. Most of the records of Mesopotamian astrology we have are in the form of stone tablet letters from astrologers to the king. These letters described what was going on in the sky and gave the king advice for how to respond. In the tablets, lunar omens are mentioned twice as often as omens involving all of the other planets combined. 40% of all omens involve eclipses. So lunar eclipses were clearly very important, but the moon wasn't just an important messenger. The moon was also the measure of time. Ancient Mesopotamia used a lunar calendar, which is different from the solar calendar that we use. Our society marks our days by the rising and setting of the sun, and we mark our years by the Earth's full circuit around the sun. But the important measures of time in Mesopotamia were lunar months based on the moon's phases. Before we talk about the divine moon in Mesopotamia, I would like you to imagine the moon as a deity. I realize that some of you watching this or listening to this might be driving or chopping vegetables or doing something else that wouldn't make it possible for you to close your eyes. But if you can, I'd like you to close your eyes or focus and imagine the moon as divine, as a divine being. Try to form an image of the moon that is as specific as you can make it. In the scene you are imagining, where are you standing? What is the environment like? What does your moon deity look like? Are they human? If they are human, what is their gender expression like? Okay, when you're ready, open your eyes if you've closed them and think about what you saw. If you pictured a goddess, you're not alone. When I do this exercise, I usually see a goddess myself, even though I work so much with Mesopotamian astrology. In the ancient world and today, the world was usually presented as feminine. The ancient Greeks were so shocked when they discovered a temple to the moon that saw the moon as male that they assumed that they must have misunderstood their Mesopotamian guides and decided that it was actually a temple to the goddess Selene. But in Mesopotamia, their lunar deity was male. It was the moon god Sin. There's disagreement about whether or not Sin was head of the Mesopotamian pantheon before that position was given to the Babylonian god Marduk. But the hierarchy doesn't really matter. Regardless of whether or not he was technically king of the gods, Sin was very important, as evidenced by the fact that the vast majority of omens were moon omens. In Mesopotamian polytheism, like I mentioned a moment ago, the planets were avatars of the gods. So Sin wasn't just associated with the moon, he was the moon, which meant that he shared all of the moon's qualities. This had some interesting consequences. If the moon is the deity of time, we're not talking about time as a constant. We're not talking about the ticking of a clock. We're talking about a time that moves in cycles and phases, cyclical time. Moon time is profoundly difficult to measure. You can't make a moon dial the way you can make a sundial. Well, you can, but it's only accurate on the night of the full moon. Moon time is measured by the phases of the moon. For the Mesopotamians, a new moon began with the first appearance of the crescent moon after the dark of the moon, and that was the beginning of their official month. Each moon phase lasts about a week, so weeks and lunar months were the easiest things to measure in moon time, not days and years. The idea of a 7-day week with a pause at the end is an idea that we probably inherited from Mesopotamia. And they had civil holidays at the start of roughly every moon phase. These cycles and pauses are important. Human energy is not constant like the sun's energy appears to be. though we now know that even the sun waxes and wanes with solar flares. Humans have cycles of rising and falling energy, and moon time mirrors that. Moon time is also subjective. We don't experience time as constant unless we're listening to a metronome. Like Einstein pointed out, when we're with someone we love, time seems to fly. When we're listening to a boring lecture, hopefully not this one, time seems to drag. This subjective experience of time is ruled by the moon. And in a society where the moon was the measure of time, that subjective view of time was honored. In modern traditions of astrology, the sun, Jupiter, and Saturn are the wisdom planets. In some of those traditions, the moon is associated with the physical brain and with intuition, but the moon is not seen as a planet of intelligence or wisdom. In Mesopotamia, that wasn't the case. The moon god Sin was actually the god of wisdom in that pantheon. Sin's wisdom was so respected, the gods met with him at the beginning of the month so that he could tell them what to do. Associating the moon with wisdom gives us a profoundly different understanding of wisdom. I think that in many ways, our culture associates wisdom and intelligence with order. How often are the smart kids actually the ones that are the most organized and consistent? Assigning the moon to be the planet of wisdom creates a picture of wisdom that is more humane, I think. It isn't rigid and predictable like a factory. It moves with cycles of human energy, and it's free to go unexpected places. It's free to innovate. Important for people with unpredictable rivers who have to live in a way that's creative, I think. Assigning the moon to a male deity also means that the moon is a father. In Mesopotamian mythology, Sin was the father of Venus and the sun, the divine twins pattern that appears in cultures all over the West. In this model, darkness is not the evil opposite of light. Light emerges from darkness, just like the light of the moon and the stars emerges from a dark sky. In astrology, the moon is associated with parenting and with nurturing and care. Usually, the lunar parent is seen as being the mother, but the moon god Sin is a symbol representing the fact that there are parents of all genders who take on that nurturing role. In the end, the idea of a moon god challenges one of the most common gender binaries, the sun god and the moon goddess. When we assign the divine masculine to the sun and the divine feminine to the moon, we're saying that men are objective and orderly and women are subjective and cyclical. The truth is that people of all genders are capable of being methodical and cyclical, objective and subjective. Even within the gender binary, there are extremely solar women, I'm one of them, and there are extremely lunar men. So let's move on to Venus. Inanna Ishtar was the Mesopotamian deity associated with Venus. Like Venus, Inanna Ishtar was associated with love and sex, but she was also a deity of war. Inanna Ishtar had an interesting history, actually. The first civilization that we know of in Mesopotamia was the Sumerian kingdom. But for most of written history, Mesopotamian culture was a blend of two cultures, Sumerian and Akkadian, in the ancient world anyway. The original Venus of Mesopotamia was Inanna, the Sumerian goddess. But during the reign of the Akkadian king Sargon, Mesopotamia was conquered by the Akkadians. Instead of imposing their culture onto the people of Sumer, the Akkadians actually adopted the culture of Sumer, the people that they conquered. The Akkadians had a pantheon of 3 gods, and the Sumerians recognized many, many gods. And so the Akkadians put their 3 most important gods, the sun, the moon, and Venus, in important positions in the pantheon, but then also adopted all of the Sumerian gods and made them as important as well. The Akkadians brought with them a male god associated with the planet Venus called Atar. Atar evolved into the goddess Atart. Atart became the Canaanite goddess Ashtoreth. And when Ashtoreth made her way to Greece, she became Aphrodite. So we have a direct line of evolution from the Akkadian male god of Venus to the Greek female Aphrodite. In Mesopotamia, the Akkadian Atar was syncretized with the Sumerian Inanna and became Inanna Ishtar. In the beginning, Inanna Ishtar was seen as sometimes male and sometimes female. We have tablets from the reign of Ashurbanipal that say that Venus evening star was female and Venus morning star was male. This idea was preserved in Hellenistic astrology. Venus morning star was seen as more assertive and warlike, or male, and Venus evening star was seen as more peaceful and gentle, or female. This idea appears in Plato's Symposium too. He describes morning star Aphrodite as a terrestrial Aphrodite, the goddess of animals mating. Evening star Venus was celestial Aphrodite, who wears the sky as a crown. We're going to go back to the starry crown later, but first we need to take a trip in the opposite direction, down to the underworld. One of the most famous stories we have about Inanna Ishtar is the descent of Inanna. In the story, Inanna decides that she's going to attend the funeral of her sister's husband. Inanna's sister was Ereshkigal, the ruler of the underworld. Inanna knew that people who go down to the underworld are not allowed to come back up again, so she made arrangements for the gods to get her back if she got stuck. As she approached the gates of the underworld, she was told that she was going to have to hand over a symbol of her power. She asked why, and was told that it was a rule of the underworld, so she handed over one of those symbols. The underworld had 7 gates, and she was required to hand over a symbol of her power at each gate until she arrived in the underworld completely naked. Inanna's sister was not happy to see her, so she turned her into a piece of meat and hung her on the wall. When it became clear to the gods in the upper world that Inanna was stuck, the god Enki created creatures out of the mud from under his fingernails and sent them down to the underworld to negotiate for Inanna's release with Ereshkigal. He told them to show empathy for her suffering. Her husband had just died. And through empathy, they convinced Ereshkigal to release Inanna on the condition that somebody else was sent in Inanna's place. Inanna returned to the land of the living to choose Ereshkigal's victim, and she saw that her husband had been feasting and sitting on her throne during her absence instead of mourning like everyone else. Naturally, she was very angry. And in her anger, she chose her husband to go to the underworld in her place. The descent of Inanna is an odd story. It's almost like one of those dreams where you're naked and doing a presentation in front of your class at school, except the teacher turns you into a steak in the middle of it. This story makes more sense when it's seen as a metaphor for the Venus cycle. And by that, I mean the planet Venus. Every year and a half, the planet Venus goes retrograde. It's a bit like Mercury retrograde, except the stereotype is that you go back to your ex-lovers instead of having to rewrite an article because you forgot to back up your computer. When Venus goes retrograde, the planet Venus is in its evening star phase, and it appears to get lower and lower in the sky at sunset. It's as if the planet is actually going down to the underworld. And then it disappears from view for 40 days and 40 nights. And at the end of that time, Venus reemerges on the other side of the world as Venus morning star on the eastern horizon. Venus morning star is angry Inanna, who has returned from her trip to the underworld and discovered that her husband didn't miss her very much. In astrology, every natal chart has Venus in it. And that Venus is somewhere in Inanna's journey. It can be Venus evening star, preparing to descend to the underworld. It can be retrograde and in the underworld, or it can be Venus morning star returning to the land of the living. So you can determine this if you get your birth chart by physically rotating it so that the sun is all the way to the left as far as it will go. And the reason why you do this is because you want a picture of your chart as if the sun was rising on the eastern horizon. For some reason, astrology charts always put the eastern horizon in the left, where we don't really expect it to be. We usually associate that with the west, but in astrology charts, that's the east. So then you want to look for Venus in your chart. And Venus is usually not going to, never is going to never be too far away from the sun, because it can only get about 60 degrees apart, or two signs, because of the way that our perspective as a body orbiting the sun and Venus's perspective orbiting the sun influences the way that we see the planet. So if you have the sun on the eastern horizon to the left, if your Venus is higher up in the chart than the sun, you have Venus morning star, because Venus rises early in the morning before the sun, while it is still dark. And so that is the time that Venus is visible. But if you have Venus underneath the sun, that means that the sun rises before Venus, and Venus kind of follows along the sun invisible for the entirety of the day, until the sun disappears over the western horizon. And then for a little while before Venus follows, Venus is seen on the western horizon at night. So if you were born with Venus evening star, your Venus is expressing the peaceful side of Venus. It's Venus before.
Can I interrupt and just ask, just
yes,
to clarify?
Of course.
So, for example, I was born as the sun was setting, and my sun is on my descendant in my 7th house, right, about to set, and my Venus is in Aries, so just behind the sun. So that would mean that my Venus was an evening star.
Yes, that's absolutely right.
So it's like my chart would be flipped from what I'm seeing here. But if I imagine flipping my chart, then my Venus would be where that evening star Venus is.
Right. So if you physically rotate the chart so that your sun is all the way on the other side, like you flip it that way, it should show your Venus if it's evening star behind the sun.
So another way somebody could think of it is like if your chart is a clock and your Venus is at a lower, or is behind, is like if your Venus is coming after your sun, would be if the clock were turning, then you're an evening star. Your Venus is an evening star, and if the Venus is ahead of your sun in that clock, it would be a morning star. Would that be another?
Yes. Way? So. Okay. Yep. Which is confusing because it seems like it's in reverse zodiacal order. But one of the confusing things about astrology is that over the course of the year, the planets go counterclockwise through the sky, Aries, Taurus, Gemini, which is, assuming I'm not being mirrored here, it's this way. Yeah. But over the course of the day, the planets go clockwise. So it actually goes from the ascendant to the descendant by way of the midheaven. So the planets actually go 1, 12, 11, 10, 9, 8 over the course of the day. So when you're looking at what's called diurnal motion, or the motion of the planets throughout the day, you actually have everything moving backwards from the way that you would expect.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for clarifying it. I don't want everybody to be confused, because I want everybody to leave this talk knowing who their Venus is.
Yeah,
I want to introduce everyone to their Venus.
The mind puzzle. Yeah.
That's astrology for sure.
Yeah. Cool. Keep going.
Okay. So if you have evening star Venus, you have that peaceful Venus, Inanna, before she has had this experience of betrayal. So that Venus is going to try to spin a story for you that supports the quest for peace in your life. If you were born with Venus morning star, on the other hand, your Venus is that Inanna who has experienced the betrayal of her husband. And so your Venus is the angry Venus who has just returned from the underworld and is oriented towards fighting injustice. Having Venus morning star in your chart tends to feel uncomfortable because the warrior side of Venus is not as supported by our culture as the peaceful side of Venus. Warrior women and non-binary people tend to get more pushback than warrior men, of course. So those genders will typically have a more difficult time with the Venus morning star, but all warriors are messy, especially when they're expressing righteous indignation and not marching in orderly columns.
So I'm just thinking, so like I just said, my Venus is in Aries, but is an evening star, right? So that's a funny little combination.
Yeah,
that's interesting because I certainly have that warrior goddess thing in me, for sure, big time. But I am about bringing peace. Well, plus my sun and my Mercury and Pisces, all kinds of things. But yeah, so to have the mix of those, that's really fascinating. Yeah.
So does it resonate for you to say that you're a person who fights for peace?
Totally. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, for sure.
You combine those two energies in such a generative way.
Well, I mean, even this symposium, I would say is that, in a certain sense. Yeah.
I see that for sure.
But then also earlier, in my career as working for child protective services or whatever. Yeah. Yes.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. A celebrity who has Venus in Aries who she's a little bit controversial, but in many ways I admire her, is Angelina Jolie. And she fights in all of these action movies with a lot of violence in, but one of the ways that you can see her relationship with her children and her decision to adopt so many children is that warrior Venus energy trying to step in and save people who are in a vulnerable position. And I think that I don't remember if she has Venus evening star or Venus morning star, but I think that that's definitely an expression of Venus in Aries, whether it's morning or evening star. So
beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you. And as I'm going to talk about in a second, I have Venus in Aries too. So I'm like, yeah, Team Aries.
Yeah, there we go. Awesome.
So I think it's not an accident that one of the names of Venus morning star is Venus Lucifer. And Lucifer is one of the names of the devil. I think that people who have that side of Venus tend to get quite a lot of pushback in our culture. And if you're a woman or a non-binary person, the discomfort of having Venus morning star in your natal chart can express itself as confusion around gender, because love and war, peace and aggression, assertiveness and passivity are so gendered in this culture that gender is often the only language available for talking about these two faces of Venus. Thank goodness for astrology, right?
Yes. Going back to the narrative therapy, narrative astrology. Yep, making sense.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Presenting things. It's about giving us more of a vocabulary to talk about things. If you have a vocabulary that only has 12 words, you're not going to be able to speak as accurately or with as much nuance as if you have more symbols. And one of the things that I think narrative does is give us symbols that break us out of the limitations of our limited symbol sets. So I have Venus morning star in my natal chart. And I also have Venus in Aries, which means that I have an extra spicy Venus. When I was younger, I struggled a lot with gender, but I never wondered if I might be a trans man or non-binary. And it's not just because I grew up in very conservative evangelicalism. I just knew that there was something about my gender that wasn't right. And it wasn't that it was wrong for me, it's that it didn't fit into the world out there, especially the world that I was raised in. I was assertive, and fortunately, especially in that environment. I was lucky that the feedback that I got from the people I loved me was that I should actually lean into that and be more assertive. But I also got a lot of messages saying that my way of expressing femininity was inappropriate. I heard things like, don't be too forward. As a straight woman, you shouldn't deprive men of the pleasure of chasing you.
What?
Yeah, I heard that a lot from
Are you serious?
everywhere.
Oh,
I'm serious.
even
Yeah.
in your generation, which is younger than mine. What?
I was born in 85 and I was still hearing it as a teenager. It's ridiculous.
Uh, okay. Anyway.
Yeah, right? Hopefully
Uh,
I'm the only one at the symposium who experienced that, because I don't wish it on anyone.
no, I'm sure you're not the only one, unfortunately. Ugh.
Oh, that makes my Venus morning star angry.
Yes. Make my evening star angry. So there you go.
Yeah, Team Aries. So
yeah.
as a teenager, you can't really see it now, I don't think, but I actually dealt with this by adopting a punk rock aesthetic. I spent all of my weekends at punk shows, and I actually ended up working at a punk venue for a while. And I did this, it wasn't conscious, but I had this unconscious instinct that I needed to surround myself with a community that supported that more assertive nature, and also a community that gave me a safe outlet for my frustration. I'm pretty sure that hardcore mosh pits saved my life as a teenager. And women who have morning star Venus in their charts, and I think a lot of women with morning star Venus in Aries often have to adopt creative strategies like this. I actually wrote about this experience on my blog. You can find it on my website, adapembroke.com.
I'll just say I went to mosh pits as a teenager too, and when I was 19, a longer story, but anyway, I decided I wanted to be a lesbian separatist, and I shaved my head, and and anyway, yeah. So I mean, I identify as cisgender female, but with some, I would go by like she, they ish, whatever. But
yeah,
yes. So yeah, certainly I can relate to what you're talking about.
Yeah, I definitely will never get mad at anyone who uses they pronouns for me. I've not had that experience, interestingly, even though I have that relationship with Venus and Aries. Mm-hmm. Even online, which is kind of odd. But I don't want to leave out the Venus evening star people. I promised that I would return to Venus of the starry crown. Mm-hmm. There's an image that the Greeks and the Mesopotamians both had for Venus evening star. They saw her, and in the end, they did settle on female as her default gender, wearing the sky like a cloak, the starry sky at night.
Wow.
So isn't it beautiful?
So beautiful. Especially with that image there that you have on the screen. Oh my goodness. Yeah.
I love Canvas images. I really do. But like I mentioned earlier, the Mesopotamians didn't believe that fate was immutable. So the image of Nana Ishtar embodying the cosmic dance wasn't saying that she spun out the events of life. She wasn't a storyteller who was placing you in a story the way that children playing with dolls will like make you speak the things that they want you to say. As the polytheistic religions of the old world started to unwind, the Mesopotamians were starting to reach toward pantheism and the idea that the whole universe is a single divine being. They saw Inanna Ishtar as the universe, and they thought that the other gods were so small in comparison. The planets, the planetary gods, were just parts of her cloak. And when the Hellenistic Greeks took up the mantle of astrology and absorbed Mesopotamian astrology into their worldview, they brought that fatalism with them and incorporated it into the system that the Mesopotamians created. And they saw this image of Aphrodite or Inanna Ishtar as the starry sky, as a goddess controlling fate and spinning out the illusion of reality. So the illusion of reality, I want to explain what that means by telling a story. So this is a story that David Foster Wallace, the author, told in 2005 when he was giving the graduation speech at Kenyon College. He said, there are these two young fish swimming along, and they happen to meet an older fish swimming the other way who nods at them and says, morning, boys, how's the water? And the two young fish swim on for a bit, and then eventually one of them looks over at the other and goes, what the hell is water? So there are so many things that we take for granted that way. It's the way things are. It's not that we're ungrateful or insensitive. It's the nature of the human brain to become used to things. It's like wearing glasses. 90% of the time, I forget that they're there, even when the frames, not flames, are blocking my peripheral vision. I wish I was that punk rock still. Like I really do. So if we have to, we can adapt to just about anything. You can put glasses on people that make the world look upside down and backwards, and the brain will actually adjust to this new reality in a few days. And the person with this view of reality will be able to operate as if it's completely normal. The Greek philosopher Parmenides called this phenomenon ananke, which roughly translates as necessity. And he called her a goddess. In the story of the two fish, Ananke is the force that controls their view of reality. She convinces the fish that a watery environment is all there is, so completely that they don't even know that environment is there. Inanna Ishtar is the force that creates the illusion that what we see is all there is. Her ability to manipulate the illusion is one of her greatest powers. But as we've learned, this isn't the only face of Inanna Ishtar. She's the spinner and she is the thread. She is the one who creates the illusion, and she is the one who breaks it. In the story of the descent of Inanna, she descends to the underworld under the illusion that her husband loved her. And when she returned, the illusion shattered. Reality forced itself on her, and she was like a fish pulled out of the water and forced to confront the reality of air. Our conceptions of gender can be like that. Our experience of gender can be such an invisible part of our experience of reality. The moon and Venus are the only female classical planets that we have. It wasn't until the dwarf planet Ceres was discovered in the 19th century that gender representation started to expand. We have an instinct, I think, that representations of the divine feminine are important. And encountering the moon or Venus as male deities, especially in a system with such little female representation as it is, can leave us gasping. I think it's important to honor these feelings, even if we acknowledge that sin and Inanna Ishtar remind us that nurturing is not the exclusive domain of women, and assertiveness is not the exclusive domain of men. One of the things I love about the gods of polytheism is that they are fish in the water with us. Inanna Ishtar isn't above it all, spinning out fate for us mere mortals. She's a goddess of love who's deceived in love, like Aphrodite being shot by one of Cupid's arrows. Inanna Ishtar is down in the illusion with us, and she experiences the trauma of the illusions that she creates shattering just like we do. So I hope that you don't mind if I end with a prayer to Inanna Ishtar.
Oh, that would be wonderful. Beautiful.
Thank you. Inanna Ishtar, evening star, give us the grace to spin with you the thread of love. Bind us together with your sacred cord, that we may experience ourselves as one, members together of the cosmic cloak you wrap around yourself. Inanna Ishtar, morning star, with you we are witnesses of injustice. Give us the courage to be with you in your anger when the illusions that divide us from ourselves and from each other are revealed. Help us to be in the truth wherever we are. So thank you. Thank you so much for listening to my talk. Thank you so much for giving me your time and attention. And thank you so much for inviting me to give this talk, Martha. If you want to connect with me, you can find all of my socials and contact information and essays that I've written, including the one that I mentioned about Venus and Aries, on my website, adapembroke.com. And if you want to reach out to me or get an astrology reading, I would love to hear from you.
So beautiful. Thank you, Ada.
Thank you.
Like, that was medicine. That was magic. Magic and medicine, listening to you, and I can just feel it's like a transmission straight through my body.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I'm kind of speechless. So beautiful. Your writing is so beautiful, and oh wow, yeah, I need to read more of what you've written.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm working on a book, so hopefully within the next, well, I want to say a few months, but hopefully the next year or so there will be more to read.
Maybe we can talk again when that book is coming out or something.
Oh, I would love that.
What's the book about?
Narrative astrology.
Really?
The title of it. Yes, I think the title is going to be narrative astrology. I'm going to be focusing on the way that astrology can help you understand yourself as a hero, understand yourself as existing in a story in which you have agency, like the Mesopotamians saw things, and help you find your quest and your allies in a consistent sense of who you are and what you're doing here.
That is amazing. Yeah, I could imagine you
I
writing
can't wait.
so many different books on so many things, and in so many. Do you write poetry also?
I do, actually. My MFA started out as an MFA in poetry, and I ended up doing my creative thesis as a novel, but it ended up being a very short one because I brought that poetic approach, and all of my paragraphs were wound very tightly with imagery, so it only ended up being like 50,000 words, I think.
Wow. Do you share any of your poetry on your website or anywhere?
I don't, but I should. After writing that prayer, I was like, I should be doing more of this.
Yeah, because I could feel it. I mean, that prayer was so, well, actually, this whole presentation was so, for me, so pure and like gentle, but it's almost like the light of the moon, the light of the stars, the light of the rivers, like just speaking through you, all, anyway, I can't put it into words quite, but it was amazing. Thank you so much. It's like gonna make me cry.
Thank you.
Yeah. I feel like I should ask you what something. It's just like that's it. That's it's just so beautiful. Yeah.
Well, I have a Taurus sun, and Taurus rules the throat, but it's also the sign of silence. And so I think that sometimes sacred silence is the best response to a situation.
That's exactly what I'm feeling. It's like, say, just you know what I mean? Yeah, just
I do.
being in that.
I
Yes.
do.
Mhm. Okay, well, thank you. And yes,
Thank you.
all of your information is with this video on the symposium, and beautiful. Yeah, I can
I
imagine.
have a free gift as well that you asked me to talk about. I'm not sure if this is the right
Yes,
time.
go. Yes, please, yes.
So I have a free gift that I'm offering to people who sign up for my newsletter on my website. You should have the link. I gave it to Martha, but if you sign up for my newsletter, you'll get a free copy of my ebook, which is called Listening to Star Song, which, if you are new to astrology, and I realize that we've got quite a few people who are not new to astrology, but if you are new to astrology,
a lot who are new. Yes. Yeah.
oh, fantastic. So hopefully it'll speak to a lot of you, but it's a graphic novel style ebook, which presents astrology from my perspective. It explains narrative astrology, and it also helps you to get a copy of your birth chart if you don't have one. And it helps you to do a basic interpretation of all of the symbols. So if you were curious about whether you have a Venus morning star or Venus evening star, it will help you to get your chart and figure out the answer to that question. Of course, if you are having trouble or you want to talk with someone more about your relationship with Venus, I would be very happy to help you out. But hopefully listening to Star Sign will help you get started on that journey.
That sounds amazing. I definitely am going to take a look at that myself. And I'm
Thank you
not
so
new to
much.
astrology, but I want to take a look at that anyway. Yeah, amazing. And the title again, oh my goodness, the way you use words is just wow. Yeah. I
Thank you
cannot
so
wait to see
much.
how what you do in the world moving forward. It's yeah, so much there.
I'm very curious myself. In a lot of ways, I'm a solar person, but I'm in a chapter of my life that is very heavily influenced by the moon. So the last 7 years or so have been definitely a crash course in that unpredictable, phase-driven, cyclical way of being in the world, which is one of the reasons I've been so drawn to Mesopotamian astrology. I've just been like, I don't understand this. I need to put on a new pair of glasses so that I can understand the world as I see it all of a sudden.
Beautiful.
Thank
Wonderful.
you.
Anything you feel like you need to say before we end? Does that feel complete?
No, this is fantastic. Thank you so much for having me. And I feel so blessed that I've been able to share this material.
Yeah, thank you. Such a beautiful addition to all of us here. Thank you.